My name is Louise O'Neill. I am an author and I live in Clonakilty, West Cork. And I have written 5 novels, I'm trying to think, 3 of which are for young adults and 2 of which are for adults. Sure. There are 3 of them, as I said. The first one is Only Ever Yours, and that was published in 2014. It's a dystopian novel set in a world in which women are unable to have daughters. So these schools are set up where girls are bred for their beauty and then trained to be subservient to men. So it deals with, body image and eating disorders, and I think the pressure that young women are under to attain, what is often an impossible standard of beauty. My second novel, Asking for It, was published in 2015. That's probably my best known novel because there was a stage adaptation that came off the back of that. So that deals with rape culture, slut shaming, and sexual violence. And my third novel for young adults is called The Surface Breaks. That was published in 2018, and that is a feminist retelling of The Little Mermaid. Well, I think it was interesting, particularly with my first novel. I didn't necessarily think I was writing a novel for young adults. I think the story had come to me and I was trying to tell it the best way that I could. I was 26 when I was writing that book, and I had been living in New York, and I had moved back home to Clonakilty for the first time since I was a teenager. And actually, in a funny way, I think that I almost regressed to being a teenager again when I had to move back in with my parents into, my childhood bedroom. And I think I could really readily access a lot of the emotions that I had had as a teenager. A lot of the pain, a lot of the trauma, a lot of the hurt. And I suppose all of those mental health issues that I had been dealing with at that time, and I could really see that being manifested in Only Ever Yours, and then again in Asking for It. So I don't know. I think that my adolescence was a really difficult period for me. It was very challenging in a lot of ways, and I think because of that, it's something that has really stayed with me. And I think it's something that I can kind of readily access because of that. Well, I was a teenager. I was 14 or 15 when I developed an eating disorder. And I struggled with that really all the way into my 30s. I would have had periods of, I wouldn't even say recovery, but I suppose I would have had periods where I didn't have any symptoms, but I was still struggling with the mental attitudes that accompany an eating disorder, like perfectionism and, having incredibly hard standards for myself and never feeling good enough, and, a lot of self-loathing, a lot of, self-criticism. So I think that my issues with mental health actually started at quite an early age. And I think a big problem was that I was the sort of teenager and the sort of young woman who wouldn't admit if I was struggling. I always wanted to be seen as thriving, as doing well, as being really capable, that I didn't need anybody else's help. And I think I felt that being vulnerable or asking for help was a sign of weakness. And I think now, I'm in my 30s, and I think now I understand that the ability to ask for help is actually a sign of strength. I think so. You asked earlier about, I suppose the impact that has had on my writing. And then I suppose the inverse of that, the impact that my writing has had on my mental health. And I think actually the two are really intertwined. Because I suppose that, like, when I started to write, I was kind of processing a lot of those emotions and a lot of the issues that I'd had with my mental health through my work. And I do think it was incredibly cathartic in that way. And, I know from talking to psychologists and therapists that they would often recommend, writing and journaling as a tool to for their patients, to help them with their mental well-being. And I can see that myself. I've kept a diary since I was a very young child, maybe 7 or 8. I mean, obviously at the time, like my biggest problems were how much homework I was getting and, what we were having for dinner. But I do think that, I notice on the days where I don't journal, where I'm not working through how I'm feeling on the page, I definitely notice, I think, a dip in my mood on those days. So it really does have an impact. God, I often feel quite sad. I think when I look back at my teenage self, because she was just so hard on herself. And I think that would be the one thing that I would really wish for myself at that age, was that I would have been able to develop self-compassion. And I think self-compassion and self-confidence are two entirely different things, because I think self-confidence is very much predicated on external factors, like how you look or how other people perceive you, or what grades you're getting in school, or how successful you are, or how popular you are. Whereas actually self-compassion is loving yourself and being kind to yourself, using kind language towards yourself, no matter what happens, even if you fail, even if you fall down. I suppose talking to yourself the same way that you would talk to your best friend. And I think that if I have been able to cultivate that self-compassion in myself as a teenager, I think I would have had a much easier life. I mean, sometimes, I know particularly when I was writing Asking for It, that was a very difficult book to write. I had experienced sexual trauma as a teenager, and I think that, I suppose, dealing with that in my fiction was bringing up a lot of quite painful memories. But I suppose the thing that you learn, particularly through therapy, is that you can't suppress those feelings, that actually, if you allow them to come up, if you really feel your feelings, they'll pass through you like much quicker. I think the danger actually happens when we try to stuff them down, or we try to suppress them, or we try to numb out, using whatever sort of available addiction that we can find, whether that's shopping or drinking, or spending too much time on our phones. That actually just sitting with the painful emotions, there's great healing in that. And I think that so often we have been taught that we're supposed to feel happy and we're supposed to feel joyous all of the time, and that we can't allow anything else in. Whereas actually, I think in order to fully understand what it is to be happy, we also have to experience sadness. That the light cannot exist without the dark. Well, actually, I think the tip that I would give for any aspiring writers is actually very similar to the advice that I would give anyone who is listening today and wants to have better mental health. And that is not to be critical of yourself. Because actually, I think when you're trying to write, particularly the first draft, you have to be very gentle with yourself. Because if you're going to look at your first attempts to write or to create any kind of art, and you say you're not good enough, this is useless, who do you think you are, like what gave you the right to try and create this, you're not going to continue. So actually, I think it's being gentle with yourself. And it's telling that inner critic, the voice that is telling you that you're not good enough, telling that to be quiet. And just keep going, just sit down at your desk, just keep writing. And it sounds a bit trite, but I think the most important thing is just to believe. Well, this novel is my newest novel. It was just published on the 3rd of September. It is called After the Silence. Here. And it is set on a small island off the coast of West Cork called Inishroon, where this very wealthy, glamorous family, the Kinsellas, have set up a world-renowned artist retreat centre. And the youngest Kinsella son, Henry, has married a local woman called Keelan. And it's at Keelan's birthday party that this wild storm engulfs the island, completely shutting it off from the mainland. And the next morning, the body of a young woman is found. And no one can get on the island, and no one can get off the island. So it has to have been someone there who did it. And then 10 years later, the murder of the beautiful Nessa Crowley still haunts the Irish people. So a team of documentary makers arrived to Inisherin, determined to figure out exactly what happened that night. In the beginning, and we called them the Crowley Girls. They were born of this island as we were, sister children, brethren, kin, soil and bone, a common blood running through our veins, for our ancestors had been family once, if you went back far enough. We tell you this, for you must understand the ways of Inisherin before we begin our story. We were all connected here. But those girls were not like us. Since they were children, we had whispered to one another of their otherworldly beauty, their golden waves of hair, their eyes so green, their long legs and short skirts or tight jeans. We watched them, but they watched each other. They had no need of anyone else. 3 is a magic number, of course. 3 wishes granted, the wayward sisters, the Morai, the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Those girls were protected when they were still 3. They were blessed. They were charmed. Born under a blood moon made of stardust shimmering bright. But then the island was swallowed whole by the night, and one of the Crowley girls was taken from us, breaking the spell. Death came to this land, and we were never the same after that. Which one of the girls, you might ask? Which one of the sisters lost her life on that terrible day? Oh, but the best one of all.